I'm Lenape, otherwise known as the Delaware people, and we originated on the east coast of the United States, but now there are two communities in Canada, and they're both located along the Thames River in southwestern Ontario. I am from the Wolf Clan as well, and so any of you that know anything about Wolf Clan, you know that we're one of the best clans. Yeah, I want to talk to you about wellness. And I'm going to talk to you about wellness from an Indigenous perspective. There we go. So there's many ways of thinking about wellness. When you think about wellness, what's one of the things that comes to your mind? Mental health, okay. What else? Community. What else? Connection. Satisfaction. Family. Okay. Okay. Lots of good descriptors. In this word scramble, it's identifying wellness from a physical health perspective. It names some of the characteristics that you talked about, but it's missing lots. And so in Canada, you can't see all of what this says. But we've designed this beautiful, complex, comprehensive model to talk about wellness. And it talks about wellness from an Indigenous knowledge perspective. Indigenous knowledge forms the foundation. And so the background color of this model is what we say, PEI red. It's the red color of the earth to represent the red color of man, of human beings. And so we intentionally colored the bottom of this red so that it would be easy to see that culture forms the foundation of everything we do and understand about wellness. So this model, it talks about the key drivers of wellness, facilitators of wellness, is family, community, and clan. I introduced myself as Wolf Clan. And that tells a beautiful story about our connection and our place, our characteristics, our personality, our gifts, and our way of living, our roles and responsibilities on this earth. So it then should tell us that our connection to creation is vital, critical, significant, and important for our wellness. And then it goes on to talk about wellness across the lifespan, across all of the different ways that people come into services through institutional care. We have more kids in the child welfare system in Canada today than we ever had in the residential school system. We have 4% of the population in Canada is an Indigenous population, but we're about 90% of people incarcerated in the justice system. We have, in this model, it talks about all of the different ways and the different needs that we have as Indigenous people around wellness. And then it identifies the essential basket of services that we all talk about. It implicates many players in addressing mental wellness, facilitating mental wellness. And we also know that in this model, Indigenous knowledge forms the foundation. And if we don't articulate what that vision is, yesterday we heard about it's important to define the concept. And so in this model, it identifies measurable outcomes. Outcomes of hope, belonging, meaning, and purpose, and that every one of those outcomes have measurable indicators. So if we don't know where we're going and what we hope to achieve with wellness, it's hard to get there. And our vision is often focused on deficits. And when we just focus on deficits, we miss the strengths of the people. And so that's the first paradigm shift that I want to tell you about. We have to move from this narrow focus of inputs based on deficits to a broader focus that focuses on outputs for families and communities based on strengths. And our knowledge base as Indigenous peoples comes from our creation story. You heard Elder Woody talking about creation story when he opened up our session yesterday. Our creation story is the foundation of our evidence base. It's a pattern that has been continuous, repetitive, across all times, across all generations of people on this earth. And it's still relevant today. Our story says that there's an answer for wellness, to sustain wellness, promote wellness, across every generation, across every point of our lifespan, and that change is a reality and change is possible. We've relied on evidence, however, that's absent of Indigenous worldview, Indigenous values, and Indigenous ways of doing things. But we have lots of experience as Indigenous people that tells us that that evidence base has not served us very well. We have access to Indigenous knowledge. It's still firmly planted in this earth across this country, as it is across all Indigenous populations of this world. We have a way of knowing. We have a formal education system. We have a formal process for validating scope of practice, for validating the best ways for promoting wellness. And it comes from our sacred lodges across this land. Every culture of people, despite colonization and oppression, still have access to this knowledge base. It's alive and it's well. It makes a difference. But we also know that the paradigm shifts that I'm talking about, moving from a deficit focus to a focus on strengths, moving from a focus on inputs for individuals and ignoring outcomes for families and communities, has been a continuous drain of our investments. We haven't seen the results. We haven't seen a significant enough change in the wellness of First Nations people, of Indigenous people. And so we have to think about what's going to stop that drain on our investments and get us what we need. From a focus on inputs for individuals to a focus on families and communities. Again, we get to a place that our vision takes us to. So if we don't have a vision about hope, belonging, meaning, and purpose, if we don't have outcomes that are defined based on Indigenous knowledge, rather than an adaptation of Western ways of knowing, then we can only get so far, but we're never going to achieve the wellness that we hope to see. So it's a good thing that people can change, just like the phases of the moon, just like the generations of people that have been on this earth. We've seen change over time. And the change that we need today to ensure that we are making a difference for wellness of Indigenous peoples is that we have to change the way we think. We have to change the way we think to include and understand that Indigenous knowledge isn't void of science. It doesn't mean that we reject science. In fact, our knowledge is full of science. It's full of relevant, meaningful ways of moving forward towards culture. And so change means, oftentimes, that we have to practice how we do things together. And so integration of services, aligning services, collaborating on knowledge, figuring out in conversation how we can work together to make that difference requires that we move through the discomfort of not knowing a whole knowledge system that is foreign. There's lots of people that are necessary to create this change. We've been using the theme of birds. And birds, doesn't matter what kind of birds they are, they carry the seeds of life. And they carry the seeds to ensure that there is life tomorrow. And so as leaders, you have an obligation. If you're working in mental health, and you work with Indigenous peoples, you have an obligation to ensure that there are seeds tomorrow for Indigenous people. And then every once in a while, we have to come together and talk about meaning and what do things mean. Eagles don't flock normally, but they do come together for purpose, for meaning, and for reason. And so your gathering, our conversation, our collaboration, sharing of thoughts, questioning, meaning is important for facilitating that change. If we all just think the same, we can't create change. And if we all stay comfortable in the knowledge that we have available to us today, we don't create change. Change is facilitated by questioning and conversing and collaborating and accepting that change is necessary and difference is beautiful. We can accept diversity if we believe that it's necessary for change. And so our attitudes play a significant role. Bergen said that the mind can only see, the eye only sees what the mind is prepared to comprehend. We can only see what our mind is prepared to comprehend. The foundation of our knowledge is a belief in spirit. Spirit is the foundation of everything. And then it manifests itself in this physical world. And most often, when we're working with people, we focus on the tip of the iceberg. It's the crisis. It's the problem point. Sometimes we see the iceberg that's above the water as beautiful. But most often, our conversation doesn't take us to an appreciation of the beauty and the strength that lies below. And what I'm suggesting to you is that our knowledge, Indigenous knowledge, the knowledge of peoples that have been on this earth, is valid, it's relevant, it's strong, and it's sustained us. If that wasn't true, we wouldn't be distinct Indigenous people in this world today. And so we have to figure out ways that we're going to work together. How are we going to, what are the necessary ingredients to facilitate change from your perspective, from your experience, from your work with Indigenous peoples? And I believe that we have lots and lots of tools to help us do that, and that all of the tools are necessary. It's how we work together with those tools that will make a difference for the change that we achieve. And so we have to ask ourselves, can we make room on the platform for Indigenous knowledge? Can you make room? What will be required for you to do that? For our Indigenous peoples to bring to the table their practices that have served us since we've been on this earth. And then thinking about Indigenous knowledge, how do you get access to that? Because we're not talking about handing it over so that you can do it for us. That's not what Indigenous peoples are saying. We're saying that we have knowledge that's credible, that comes from our creation story, that sustained us for generations and generations, that's critical and important for ensuring that we get to hope, belonging, meaning, and purpose. So everybody in the world wants to have hope in their life. They want to know, who am I and where do I belong? What's the meaning of my life and how do I fulfill that? What's my purpose? What is it that I do best? How do I contribute to the world? What's my roles and what's my responsibilities? For Indigenous people, we need lots of support to get back to that foundation. And it doesn't mean that it has to be a rocky, bumpy, unstable road, although sometimes that's what change is for us. It means that we have to have vision if we're going to get to a clear path of change. The question is, what's going to be the gold seal for you? What's going to be the stamp of approval? What's the evidence going to be for you that says, okay, I can think about that. I can think about how we have a relationship with Indigenous knowledge, with Indigenous peoples, how we have a relationship of defining the outcomes and how we measure those outcomes so that they make a difference for the people that we're serving, rather than for the programs that are funded. And so you have an opportunity then. We all have an opportunity to figure out the breath of life that's going to facilitate change. The foundation of our creation story is that the Creator gave us a breath of life, all of us as human beings. And so this knowledge that I'm talking about isn't just relevant for First Nations, Indigenous peoples of this world. It's meaningful for all of us, because we all have the breath of life given to us from the same Creator. And that breath of life was different. No, it wasn't different. The knowledge that each color of man on this earth was given has its own orientation, has its own value, has its own purpose. And so there are different worldviews. There's not just one. And so the question is, can we wear our capes together? You wear your cape, I'm going to wear mine. And can we come together and stand together with both worldviews to create the change that's necessary? And so it has to do with how we see. How do we see change happening? How do we make room, then, in our belief that Indigenous knowledge is credible? It's not just a philosophy. It's not just a behavior. It's spirit, heart, mind, body. And we have to figure out a way that both worldviews can coexist if we're going to get to carry life into the future. That's our responsibility, is to ensure that we carry life into the future, and that what we do in the way we carry life makes a difference for the people that we're serving. And for us, the focus has to be, again, shifting, paradigm shift number one, moving from deficits to strengths, moving from an absence of inclusion of Indigenous knowledge, values, worldview, to inclusion of Indigenous knowledge and culture as the foundation, from moving from inputs for individuals to a focus on outcomes for family and community, and also moving from that short-term pilot-based funding, 5 governments for one small community of 500 people, to collaborative, yes, there's the word, collaborative, integrated, flexible funding arrangements that are long-term and sustaining. I really liked the presentation yesterday about complexity, because capacity has to match complexity. And for Indigenous peoples, we need to ensure that we have capacity to address the complexity of the model that I showed you. So we have some questions. And the question is, when you think about transforming systems, what's truly worth doing, whether you fail or succeed? Now the question suggests that failure could be acceptable. So what would be the benefits of something that failed? That's a question for you. What's truly worth doing, whether you fail or you succeed? And what are the benefits from that? And then what have you done personally to engage others in what really matters? Okay? So there's your conversation. Thank you.